we go. Oh! Yay!
I saw that. Good morning, Timothy.
Good
Yes,
morning, Maya.
well, it's nice to see you. Well, alive and kicking and genki. That's what it means anyway. So thank you very much for being with us this morning again. And good morning to everybody who has joined us just now on YouTube, LinkedIn, and also Facebook. In Clubhouse as well, we are pleased to have you with us on this Sunday morning, September the 29th. And Timothy is once again reporting this time from a different part in Kanto. Yes, and we're going to talk about a lot of things that happened this past week. It has been a busy week in Japanese politics, also within the LDP and the other political parties, in the opposition parties as well. But, well, I'm not going to take away any of the glamour of Timothy. So, Timothy, right, I'm passing this over to you. So please let us know what we're going to talk about today in a little bit more detail, but not too much, and continue from there.
Thank you very much, Maya. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 190th episode of Japan Politics One-on-One. This is where we talk to you and we engage with you. You have the ability to write to Maya or to actually come in with your voice or your just your voice, I guess. If you're on Clubhouse, it's not available on LinkedIn, but for you, the audience, to participate in what it is that we're talking about. So it's been a very significant, as Maya said, a very significant week in Japanese politics, actually one of the most significant in recent years. The LDP had their election for prime minister, as you know. They elected their new leader in Shigeru Ishiba. The Constitutional Democratic Party also did the same thing. They have a new leader in Mr. Yoshihiko Noda. And Komeito elected their new leader. It wasn't much of an election, but it was a process with Keiichi Ishii to become the new leader after, actually succeeding the previous leader who had been in position for 3 terms, maybe 15 years. And there's a lot going on politically, geopolitically. The region is beginning to just vibrate a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about that. But I think the main focus today is on the LDP election and what that means for politics going forward. It has been very dramatic and requires a lot of, discussion and watching the tea leaves as they settle out, and we'll be doing that. And just before I turn it over to you, Maya, Dan Harada and I will be explaining what's happened over this last week on Thursday, lunchtime briefing on Thursday, because by then, today is the 29th, tomorrow's the last day of September. We move into October. The prime minister will be elected on Tuesday, and he will announce his cabinet then. And between then and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Dan and I will have a chance to look at who is in the cabinet, what this means, how this all's kind of settled out, and what it means going forward. So we'll be having a special noontime briefing on that particular subject. Back to you, Maya.
Okay, thank you very much, Timothy. And before we continue with the details, I would like to say a very big thank you to our first sponsor, Kanchu.com. So thank you, Kanchu, for the sponsorship, of course, and for everybody who is listening to us for the first time, or who is thinking about having a project in the field of real estate. Please know that Kanchu.com offers bilingual services to individuals who want to buy and sell real estate in Tokyo and Yokohama. And the company Kanchu.com also does property management and investment property To work with them, contact James Howell at james@kanacho.com or connect with James on LinkedIn. So you'll also find the contact details of James Howell in the description of the YouTube video. So do not hesitate and reach out. They'll customize their services to your needs, and you're not going to regret this working with them. So, and now, Timothy, let's continue. Let's dive into the details. I'm sure that there is quite a lot to talk about today. So, well, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Maya. And once again, good morning, everybody. So you will remember that we have reported from time to time about recent incursions by the Chinese surveillance plane or by the aircraft carrier, plus several support ships that passed through the islands of Okinawa, and also a surveillance ship that passed through, once again, not intruding into Japanese territorial waters. The surveillance plane did for several minutes, but it caused quite a reaction from the foreign ministry. And just this week, the Self-Defense Forces Maritime Unit sent a warship, a battleship, through the straits of Taiwan. And this is the first time that has happened. So it's kind of like a tit for a tat. The Japanese maritime forces have never done this in the past. And so this is just, once again, this, if you're going to provoke us, we're going to answer with some sort of a response. And I thought this was a measured response, but had none happened, it might have suggested that they have free rein in making these kinds of incursions, or the Chinese have free rein in making these incursions. So this happened at the tail end of the Kishida administration. It was a very bold move, something he might not have done had he been prime minister and there was no termination date facing him. But it was a difficult decision to make, and I think he received a lot of appreciation from the Allies. This followed just earlier from a German battleship that passed through the same straits days earlier. But it is this provocation just continues to increase, and we keep our eye on it because it's very worrying. You might have been following the news of the terrific damage that's been going on in Ishikawa Prefecture, in the Noto Peninsula area, and in regions throughout there. There was torrential rainfall over the last week, and because of the earthquake and some of the fissures that were in the mountains and in the hillsides, water leaked in, and with that much rainfall coming in, it created a lot of landslides and terrific damage. 9 people killed, maybe 200 people isolated and missing. It's really caused a huge hit to the prefecture, and the self-defense forces are there in force, as are lots of volunteers. So if you turn on the news, you're going to always see something going on in Ishikawa. It's really terrible what's happened there, and hopefully the Japanese government will get their act together and provide housing and equipment, the essentials. And I think the Japanese are fairly good at that. Getting on to the Japanese politics, you know that Shigeru Ishiba became prime minister on Friday, a very volatile up and down kind of race. The 9 candidates went to their first round in the morning, and it was decided that it was a race between Takaichi and Ishiba. And in the afternoon, the race was settled out, where Sanai Takaichi, lost to Mr. Ishiba by a very, very small margin. So this indicates this battle between the Aso faction and the Kishida faction, or the Kishida group, and the Suga group. So these 3 kingmakers, and I think out of the shuffle, probably Aso turned out to be a little bit of the loser, and Mr. Kishida turned out to be pretty much a winner. It looks like, in fact, LDP politics will be guided very heavily by his hand in moving forward. So although Mr. Ishiba is the president of the LDP and prime minister, it looks like Mr. Kishida is not going away, and he will also have a role, because it was essential for him to rally his forces. Also with Mr. Aso, he had a bit of a switcheroo. He with Konotaro as his protege, not protege. I mean, he's in the same faction. It's the only faction that continues to exist. But I think for Konotaro, expecting the full support of Mr. Aso, it just didn't come through. And he lent his support to Takaichi, and she came through. Although she was very highly popular in the first round, she fell short, just a little bit short, because the politicians' vote is more heavily weighed in the second round, considerably heavily weighed. So let me see what I've got to say about the rest of those shenanigans that came out. Let me see. So the most important outcome of this election now is, first of all, who will be in the cabinet that he will select and announce on Tuesday, and also based on those cabinet positions, what the administration is going to look like. You'll remember that Mr. Ishiba criticized Koizumi, Mr. Koizumi, when he said, you know, if I become prime minister, I'm going to call an election, general election right away, so that we can reestablish, you know, the foundations of LDP policy. And he was criticized for that. And many of the analysts said he's doing that because he doesn't have much else. He doesn't have a lot of the weight and the experience to dictate how things should be rolling out. But now that Ishiba is a prime minister, it's likely that he might call for an election sooner rather than later. We're not going to know that quite yet. Probably towards the end of the week, we'll have a better feel for that. And so please stay tuned when Dan and I talk about it on Thursday. There's a lot going on with Koizumi. He started out as one of the top contenders, you'll remember. It was Koizumi, Takaichi, and Ishiba. Typically, Ishiba, in all calculations, Ishiba was on top. Koizumi was kind of battling that, and then Sanai Takaichi. And throughout the end of the week, there was a great shift, and Takaichi began to move up in the rankings, and Koizumi began to fall a little bit low. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen to Koizumi in the new administration. Since he did so well, it's possible that he will get a cabinet post, and he needs to brush up his experience. I don't know which position would be most suitable for him, but he's not going anywhere. He's still young. He'll still make an attempt at prime minister, which is not something you can say with all of the candidates. I think probably with Kamikawa, the foreign minister now, she will not make another run for that. And also Mr. Motegi, who also didn't fare very well in the elections, he probably won't make another run for it as well. But Koizumi likely will. Konotaro, he's got, he's still got a lot of years on him in order to challenge that. I think he would make a great prime minister. But because of the rankings that he was able to generate, I mean, he was in 8th place, 8 out of 9. That's almost shocking compared to everybody else. So one of the people that did really well was Hayashi, the current chief cabinet secretary. He did extremely well. But it remains to be seen who's going to be in the cabinet and what kind of position they're going to be getting as a consequence of that. So this race was basically between Aso and Kishida and Suga. And the kingmakers turned out to be, first of all, Mr. Kishida joining hands with Suga, kind of swallowing some of their pride and some of the disdain they have for Mr. Ishiba, just to keep Miss Takaichi out of the running. So it was very close, and the LDP, I think, has decided that a woman prime minister, especially Miss Takaichi, it's not quite ready for that. She's more on the right-hand side of Japanese politics. As you know, she received a lot of support from Nippon Kaigi, as you would expect, and she and maybe 4 or 5 of the candidates also visited Yasukuni just recently, maybe 3 weeks ago. at the anniversary of the end of war ceremonies. But I think she's not going anywhere. She will probably receive a very high position in the cabinet, probably since she's economic revitalization minister now. I don't know, but the real interesting point is who will be deputy prime minister. Taro Aso has been deputy prime minister for 3 generations during Abe, Suga, and Mr. Kishida. So, based on the outcome of this election, it is extremely unlikely that he will be deputy prime minister. And in fact, it's unlikely that anybody in the Kishida faction will receive a choice cabinet post, because there's just so much blood in the water as a consequence of that. So there's more to be said about that. It's in the papers. Everybody's talking about it. Even people who weren't normally known to be experts in Japanese politics are making an opinion. So I will withhold a little bit more opinion on that, but please tune in on Thursday for Dan and my more refined assessment of what's happening, what's going to happen, and what it means for U.S.-Japan relations or foreign relations generally. China, you might have heard, fired an ICBM into the Pacific on Wednesday. This is the first time they've done something like that in 4 decades. Of course, they said this was a routine arrangement that they have been planning. Interestingly, they did not report it to Japan. They reported it to relevant countries, which meant the United States and Australia, but they failed to report it to Japan. It didn't fly over any contiguous Japanese airspace, but it is, once again, another provocative move. ICBM being fired by China the first time in 4 decades, landing in the Pacific. It's something that you must take note of. It had a dummy warhead, so it wasn't projecting a nuclear test or anything like that, but still it is in pace with this constant back and forth between China and South Korea, China and Japan, China and the United States, China and the Philippines. It just keeps coming. The extraordinary diet session will be occurring on Thursday. This will be opened by the emperor, in fact. I'm not sure how many days this will go. It's usually several weeks. It could go all the way until Christmas. And in that period of time, the cabinet will probably go under some form of questioning in the budget session. And at that time, the prime minister will likely call for a close of the House and an election. I think that's the most likely scenario. We're not going to know really crystal clear, maybe until it happens, but everybody is anticipating it. And I think by Thursday, we should have a better feel for that. Let me see, where are we coming? I think that's it for me, Maya. It's a short synopsis this week, but I'm saving up a lot for Thursday. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. So, and thank you for the what do you call that? The report. It's basically running through the points with some of the details here. And yes, before we go into the questions, the Q&A, I would like to actually once again say thank you this time to our other sponsor. It is Houze Inc. So Houze Inc. and Hana Oroshisawa Howell, who represents Houze Inc. on LinkedIn, offer bilingual services to in custom home design, construction, and renovations, plus commercial building construction. So if you are not confident in your Japanese, you have no problem communicating with Hana and Houze Inc. in English. And they will customize, once again, they will customize their services to your needs. So please do feel free to reach out to her. You find her contact details in the video of the description of the video on YouTube, and you can reach also to Hannah on LinkedIn. So Timothy, thank you very much for that. Well, I think that we surprised our listeners today with the short time of
so the questions aren't prepared yet.
The questions aren't prepared yet, but we have the first one actually from Manabe-san. Manabe-san, thank you very much for being with us today again. And the question is, do you think it is important whether or not the supplementary budget will be discussed? It will be related to time of general election and
Yeah.
several economic issues. So what is your take on this, Timothy?
So first of all, the supplementary budget is a easy tactic for the new prime minister to promote during the honeymoon period. So Ishiba, the new prime minister, whether you like him or you hate him, he will enjoy a 5 week or so honeymoon where people are getting comfortable with him. He's making pronouncements. He's trying to, expand his influence. He'll be doing things within the party and also with the certainly with his coalition, Mr. Ishii. This is a new role for the Komeito and a new leader for the LDP. So there is an opportunity here. It's not colored by the former Abe administration. Without Abe, that relationship between Komeito and the LDP was somewhat fractured. But now it's an opportunity for a new beginning. And Mr. Ishiba is well known as something of a reformist. So you can see that there's opportunity there. But with regard to the supplemental budget, it's easy for the prime ministers to say, let's spend some more money. Let's give money to the downtrodden and to people who need it. And let's spread the wealth a little bit. And the gas prices will go down and the economy will start to pick up. It's easy to do just in anticipation of the election. So probably you wouldn't link those two together. As a prime minister, you'd say, this is one of my policies. I want to impact the rural zones. Sorry about that.
You okay?
No.
No injuries. Okay.
I want to impact the rural areas so that the young people are not fleeing out of those areas and going to the big cities. He's always been a champion of the rural renovations. He was a protege of Kakue Tanaka
Mm-hmm.
a while back, long while back. So a lot of the attributes that we assign to Kakue Tanaka, not the negative things, the good things, can be ascribed to Mr. Ishiba. And the supplemental budget, I think if it was Sanai Takaichi, there would also be a supplemental budget, but it would be different in scope. It would be much larger. And she is less of a fiscal hawk than I think Ishiba is expected to be. And if you watched the yen on Friday, the yen went from when it looked like Takaichi was going to be prime minister because she did so well in the first round, the yen went to 146 or very close to $147 per yen. And then when it was announced that Ishiba would be prime minister, the yen came more strongly at 142.16. That's what it closed at on Friday. I'm sorry to go on just a little bit too long here, but Manabe, you asked a really great question. Before the announcement of prime minister, the stock market closed. And we don't know how the stock market will react to the Ishiba versus Takaichi premiership, but we expect it will be negative compared to what's going on with the yen. So keep your eye on what's going on in the stock market on Monday. It will be very volatile.
Right. Thank you for that, Timothy. And I think because you mentioned that Sanai Takaichi would have been expected to be more of a financial
Yep.
hawk, maybe, right? Because we know that her policies they lean to the what is nowadays, described as far right. But well, I think that some people's opinion of Mr. Ishiba is that he's not actually very strong in the economic field. So, and I don't know what is your take on this because he is expected definitely to do a lot for the economy of Japan, but at the same time, some people fear that his policies in concerning the economy are not so well built, and
Mm-hmm.
at least not yet.
So this is why it's so important of who he selects in his cabinet. It
Mhm.
could be that Sanai Takaichi is finance minister. You know, Mr. Aso has controlled the finance ministry for decades. And if it wasn't him as finance minister, it was his protege in his faction who
Mhm.
was finance minister while he was deputy prime minister. He's done that throughout. And so I think with the change of foreign minister, and I think Takaichi would be an appropriate finance minister, except maybe Mr. Ishiba cannot control her because she's got this direction and these leanings. And even for a prime minister, no matter who it would be, you've got a cabinet that is supposed to serve you and your interests. But with 9 candidates that were vying for the premiership, some of them will fall into the cabinet and some of them will fall out. But they all have different, as we see over the campaign period, they have different ideas and different views, and they will continue to pursue those. So even though you're prime minister and you're head of the cabinet, boy, it's not easy, dealing with these people. And as we saw even with Mr. Kishida, it is so rare that he's going to have dinner with Mr. Aso or he's going to have dinner with the finance minister or something like that, that it's reported in the newspapers. And you would think that as a cabinet official, you're meeting with them rather frequently. I mean, they're the weekly photo ops and they get together on a weekly basis. But it's really interesting to see what will shake out, who will be his friends in the cabinet, and who will be the ones that he has to accommodate because they were helpful in getting him elected. So you've got to do a little bit of back scratching there too.
Right. And I think that she represents the Abenomics policies, well,
That's right.
quite right, so to a very high extent. So we don't know. And we have Sissy Guy. Thank you very much for your comment, a kind of snarky, but we still appreciate such comments as well. So it says Takaichi announced she wants no part of Ishiba's cabinet yesterday. Where have you been? Well, we were in Tokyo, but as you know, yesterday was Saturday, so of course it's a day off for us. So, well, please forgive us for not being able to follow every single expression, of all the politicians that are on the scene. But
That's
thank you
interesting.
for this. Yes, it is interesting. Thank you very much for this because it helps us actually keep our views and the podcast relevant, and we appreciate that as well. Okay, so we also have Patrick. Thank you very much for making this comment. Timothy, you mentioned Mr. Kishida and also Mr. Suga and Mr. Aso, and that there were some kind of winners and some kind of losers. So, and Patrick in Clubhouse writes, "Good. Well." Does this mean that Maya was right in the long-running debate about whether Kishida had been underestimated? Because you mentioned that this time it seems that Mr. Kishida has been the winner behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's your take on this? Have we underestimated Mr. Kishida or what?
Well, who's this question from?
It's from Patrick.
Hello, Patrick. Thank you for trying to get me into trouble. Of course, Maya's always right, and her
Yeah.
assessments are very close to precise. But yes, Maya did say that for a couple of weeks in a row, saying that he's not going away. And actually, he kept very quiet. If you'll recall, he kept very quiet, a little bit in the background, and he only kind of zoomed up into prominence over this last week. Probably a very smart political play. But yeah, I think Maya was accurate in that assessment. And not only
Oh,
that, not only that, but I mean, everybody was taken off guard. Everybody thought that Kobayashi would do much better, that Koizumi would do better, Sanai Takaichi would probably fall out early, and that Ishiba would be kind of no, yes, no, yes. But it ended up to be a real tight race, a lot of drama, a lot of horse trading in the final hours. So, yeah, hats off to Maya.
oh, okay. Finally, finally. All right, but thank you very much for following us and also following us in a way that you actually, make the best out of these briefings. So also Cam in Clubhouse asks, will Mr. Ishiba have the trust of the military?
That's a great question. Ishiba was the Secretary General of the self-defense forces before, when it was an agency. I think this was in the Koizumi administration. And then he was defense secretary, maybe in the Aso administration. Very briefly, less than a year, I think he was defense minister. So I think,
yes,
pardon me?
2008, 2009, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even quite a year that he was in that position, and then a lot of turmoil began. But he describes himself as a defense expert or otaku. It's something that he believes very briskly in. And I think you'll see, yeah, I don't know if you're going to see any kind of diminution or the 5-year plan that was promoted by Mr. Kishida. I think that plan will still stay in place. I think it might be a little bit more eloquently administered because of Mr. Ishiba. He's a very smart guy and a dedicated conservative. You know, he's a Christian. He was born in Totori and raised as a Christian. I don't know what sect of Christian. It sounds like it might be even Catholic, but I can't tell yet. But it's interesting that he has that background. I think he'll make a good prime minister, but for anybody that's in that position, it's going to be tumultuous. If he does well with, for example, the supplementary budget and people are starting to clap their hands, and he holds a general election at a good time, maybe the 27th of this month, that's the soonest it could possibly happen. I think a lot of bets are on that. And then the other idea is that we just roll it out. We don't have a general election. We run out the clock for the lower house and let them have their election at the end of their 4-year term. It's too early for me to predict one way or the other. I kind of suspect that there will be a general election sooner rather than later, though.
Okay, so we have some more, let's say, information on YouTube from about the cabinet. And then Hiroaki writes, news media already mentioned the financial minister will probably be Kato. So this is from Hiroaki. And also in Clubhouse we have Hiroko-san. She writes, according to the recent news report, Mr. Koizumi will be appointed as constituency chairman. What are your thoughts on this, please? So this is the question from Hiroko-san about Koizumi.
So constituency chairman indicates that it will be an LDP position, an inter-party position. Kato Katsunobu going as finance minister, it's a great job for him. He, bowed out early and gave his votes to Ishiba, and so that probably bought him that kind of skin that he needs. And being finance minister is it's probably the choicest of all positions. And he's well versed in the bureaucracy. He's been Minister of State 3 different times, so I think he'll perform very well as finance minister. I didn't know that news, but thank you for sharing it with me. And I also didn't know the news about Koizumi being elected or appointed or being considered as an LDP position. So it's not a top position. It's not Secretary General. It's not one of the other ones, but I guess it will be enough to kind of keep him down. And, he's going to run for prime minister at some point in time. So little by little, I think the reason why he didn't do so well is because, most of the people who are rank and file LDP members, they're not the younger generation. They're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, most of them in their 70s. So they don't like to see the young upstarts coming in with lots of newfangled ideas. They would like to see just the policies being performed as described to them in earlier administrations. So I think his time has just not come.
Not yet. And it seems that he still needs to gain a lot of experience in networking within the party.
Yeah.
And yes. All right. So we've got also more information from, Clubhouse. Ryan, thank you very much for checking this out about Mr. Ishiba. So Ryan writes that Mr. Ishiba's Wikipedia page says he is a Protestant Christian. Thank you for letting us know.
Thank you.
Yes. So Mario, I will go to your question just in a moment. So first, please let me talk about the Asian NATO question. So from Mehran Tajfar, we have a question. Do you have any comments on the Asian NATO?
Yes. So this is beginning to gain more and more prominence. What the self-defense forces did this last week in having an incursion through the Taiwan Straits is very significant. It's the first time that they've done this, as you know. So it's showing a bit of boldness and initiative that we haven't quite seen before. Maybe because the opportunity just hasn't come up. Maybe it's just a character of the maritime self-defense forces, but it is a significant escalation, if I can say that word. The Japanese are always very delicate dealing with China, but for the fourth incursion that they've had into Japanese territorial waters, not their exclusive economic zone, but through the territorial waters and airspace, and plus, Russia and China having the 400 naval vessel flotilla having exercises in the Japan Sea 2 weeks ago, at some point in time, you've got to say, enough is enough and start playing, retribution or maybe just a bit of escalation to put a tap on things. But that's where things get really nasty, that's where mistakes are made and you have closer encounters and it's a tit for tat kind of a situation. So it seems like that's the level that we're getting into. And as you'll remember, the Japanese maritime battleship that went through the Taiwan Straits followed a German battleship that did the same route the day earlier. So it's not just Japan doing this. It's not just Japan in isolation. It is this entire flotilla of like-minded countries that are moving forward and trying to build this wall to show to China, there's a lot of retribution to be had. If you start moving kinetically on Taiwan, we are all gathered here and we have lots of forces and we've got lots of armaments and a strategy. Do you want to tangle with, 7 countries that are aligned militarily and, politically to defeat that kind of incursion? I think it would be very costly. And I think that's the strategy that they've been following.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then we've got a follow-up question on this from a different person actually on YouTube. Zizon, thank you very much for tuning in. So the question is about the so-called Asian NATO. We can guess it would include South Korea and the Philippines, but what about Taiwan?
I think, Taiwan, you're very reluctant to do something like that because that's going to be interpreted by the Chinese as undue influence. And even the United States is wary to promote arms sales and bolstering the Taiwanese military forces. They do it to a certain degree, but it's always criticized and always watched very carefully by the Chinese, as you would expect. But I think for Japan, they do some Coast Guard affiliations, but not really military, but coastal observations, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think sharing armaments from Japan to Taiwan is probably not a very good idea. It'd be perceived as too provocative.
Yeah, definitely so. Okay, so we've got other questions about Mr. Koizumi and Takaichi-san and so on from Yuka as well, and also from Hiroaki. But before we move once again to these questions, I would like to to read out a question by Mario in
Okay.
Club. And it is, do you have any comments on Hakamata-san, who was on death parole for 58 years and found innocent just last week? Police intentionally fabricated the wrong evidence back then.
So that's an issue I've been following too. Who is this? Mario?
Mario, yes.
Yeah, Mario. So this bleeds more into the public prosecutor's office and the way that they they do their business here. It's always received a lot of criticism. And for this gentleman to be falsely accused and the evidence being kind of massaged, the public prosecutor's office has like a 98% conviction rate. If they have you in their sights, if they have you in their clasp, you are more likely to be convicted as guilty, and they shine in that reputation, and they do everything in their powers to maintain it. And I think they cut some corners here. And yes, so for people who aren't aware of it, there was a retrial. It took a long time for the retrial to come up, and at the retrial, he was found not guilty based on a public prosecutor's non-disclosure or twisting the information that they did disclose that convicted him in the first place. But yeah, this was almost, I think it wasn't front page news, it was page 2 news, maybe on Tuesday, because the decision came out on Wednesday. But it's a big victory for him. What a great thing to happen, but what a terrible injustice and a kind of a blemish mark on the public prosecutor's office. A lot of people are very concerned about how justice is administered in Japan. I don't want to make any comment about that. But, we had the Carlos Ghosn case as well that reached international, renown. And there, the public prosecutor's office was clearly playing a dirty pool and creating a lot of just discord, and I think has probably blemished the reputation of the public prosecutor's office.
Right. Yes. Okay, Mario, I hope that this answer is good for, gives you some satisfaction. And I see that, yes.
No, I'm thinking that Mario has a lot more in that. I didn't prepare that part in today's briefing because it's not quite politics. It's cultural. It's something that's going on within the Japanese bureaucracy and the system here. But I didn't want to dwell too much on it. But if there's enough interest, it is an interesting case. I can get into it more, Mario, if you'd like to, open it up for a wider discussion next week. Let me know.
All right. Yes. Okay. So going back to the LDP and the post distribution there, from Hiroaki, we have some information that Mr. Keiichi and Koizumi-san, they have been, obviously slated for LDP positions, not for cabinet positions at this point of time. And then, okay, so I'll move on to Yuka's question. So she says, okay, please see my comment and question below. So she writes, the comment future was down more than 2,000 points, minus 6%, because Mr. Ishiba's election campaign comments on raising taxes. Okay. So
yeah, corporate taxes, right.
Corporate taxes. I hope he will not raise taxes at this point. My question is, Mr. Koizumi lost despite his initial popularity and strong start. Some cited his poor performance in the last debate as a reason for his defeat.
Yeah.
Do you agree with this assessment? I don't think that the debate performance carried much weight. Thank you for your answer.
Who is this from?
From Yuka.
Yuka, thank you very much. So yes, I think not actually in the last debate, but in the first debate when people were just very curious and everybody watched the first debate. They might not have watched all of them throughout the rest of the time, but they probably watched certainly the first debate, and then maybe one of the 3 last debates, which were talking or focusing on policy. But in the first debate, he did say something about making it easier for corporations to unload unwanted staff or to reduce their headcount, that sort of thing. Because as everybody knows, it's extremely difficult to do that in this country because of the social network and just the employment practices here. But that actually generated a lot of ire against him, and he was never able to shake that. And then that made him to be a little bit more cautiously watched throughout the rest of the campaign. And I think, his inexperience and his youth kind of revealed itself throughout the the weeks that followed, I mean, the campaign was only 10 days, so we didn't have a lot of time. But I think people made their decisions based on that and his final performance as well. But yeah, I think even in a better situation, he didn't stand much of a chance. I mean, he's too young, and it's a volatile time for Japan geopolitically and also nationally, with the economy, the yen where it is, the inflation rate, the cost of living, that sort of thing. So I think probably Takaichi or Ishiba would have probably made a better choice. And I think the voters acknowledge that too. Kobayashi, not quite experienced enough. Motegi, not quite liked enough. Hayashi came out very strong, and so he'll probably get a nice position. He was in the Kishida faction, as you know, so he will probably get a nice position as well. But how do you go from being foreign minister and then chief cabinet secretary? Where do you put somebody like that in the next role? So it remains to be seen. But you know, whatever his position is going to be, it's going to be better than it was before. So there are very few positions that are available. And then when you think ahead for the next election, he will definitely be a contender there, and a very strong one.
Mm-hmm. Well, but probably he needs also his father, to vouch for him, and this time his father did not.
That's right.
Right. So, and as charismatic as his father was, and of course, Koizumi-san is also a charismatic person. Obviously, that played a role. But I also think that there is a strong cultural element here. That whenever there is the Japanese population needs to make a choice, they always vote or they vouch for people with more experience.
Yeah.
Right. And in Japan, it usually means, once
Older.
again, that yes, older. The cultural connotation means that if you're older, you have more experience and probably you're more reliable.
I think to take that just a step further, if you don't mind, Maya, it's not just older is better than younger, but male is better than female.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to some degree, unfortunately, Takaichi suffered from that. I think that there is a bit of a prejudice. We can't have a woman prime minister because now her face is going to be on all the election campaign posters, and it just doesn't look that great for the LDP to raise itself up. We want somebody with a little bit more prestige, and I don't know. It's just that's just something that I've perceived. I think in the coming days we'll be able to figure that out a little bit more. But the point that I think it was Patrick, made was, she said she's not going to even be in the cabinet. Aren't you following the news, right?
Oh, that's Sissy guy. Yes.
Okay.
On YouTube. Yes.
Which is a great comment, because that tells you how disdainful she is of the result of the election, and how disdainful she is of Ishiba as prime minister. So that means she's going to be a gadfly throughout his administration. She's going to be lobbing bombs. She's going to be having comments about, what the administration is doing, that they should be doing a different way, that sort of thing. And throughout the administration, she'll be building her support for the next challenge. So she's not going anywhere. And the fact that she said, forget it, I'm not going to have anything to do with you, is really significant in my book.
Yeah, and I see that there is a lot of bad blood there as well, because she's a supporter of Abenomics policies.
Right.
She's been for a long time. And then Mr. Ishiba has been in opposition of those
Right.
policies since their very beginning. So probably there is very little chance for them working together. But at the same time, yes, I don't know. As you say, Timothy, politics is politics, and
She is a smart cookie. There's no doubt about it. I think on an intelligence scale, yeah, Motegi's up there, and I think Takaichi's is up there too in terms of IQ quotient. I think she's a real contender.
yes, and what I really appreciated about her was how gracefully she accepted the defeat this time.
Yeah.
And it tells you a lot about, the maturity of the person. And of course, as you say, that's, I believe, intelligence as well. So it was interesting to observe that as well.
She has got that smile down, doesn't she?
Yes,
So
yes.
she has that smile. The smile is wherever she's in a public forum, wherever she has a photograph, she's got that very nice, beautiful, elegant smile. She looks great. She looks very approachable. And you
Mm.
compare that to Mr. Ishiba. I don't know if he did smile for the cameras, but somebody should teach him. There's a better way to smile or something to appear more friendly. And I remember that Mr. Abe also had to have coaching on how to smile, how to be appealing to the cameras and to voters. It's not something that people are generally aware of. And like you said earlier, Maya, you were talking about a seminar that you went to on Friday, that the presenters are now being a little bit more open. They're gesticulating a little bit more. It's not like they're reading from a script and then the PowerPoint is up on the screen and then they just read from the PowerPoint and it's very boring. It's a little bit more dynamic, and you're seeing this infiltrate not just through the rest of business, but also through these kinds of seminars and through politics as well.
Right. Yes, indeed. Okay, so going back to the questions. So, Gabor, thank you for your question. Please let me read another one before we come to you, because I'm trying to follow the chronological order.
Gabor
So,
is on fire.
Gabor is on fire. Yes, indeed. Okay, so the next one from Ryan. Do you think that maybe Takaichi-san would have had a better shot of becoming LDP leader if there wasn't a public election so soon?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a difficult question
That's a difficult question indeed.
because I can't see that there would be a new president elected by the LDP to become prime minister days later, and there not to be a general election soon thereafter. It just makes so much sense. And the LDP is in such a weakened position that you want to call an election when there's a honeymoon, when there's something that's nice. And I think she could have pulled off something like that. She's not an unattractive candidate as prime minister, and as prime minister, I think she could have done some great things, and I expect Ishiba to do the same. So it's
Well,
kind of hard to tell.
yeah, it's hard to tell, but it's in at some point, and honestly, I cannot lean either way. But the membership of the LDP throughout the country probably consists of mostly senior people or people in their maybe late 40s, 50s, and so on. And I would say that, Timothy, as you mentioned earlier, culturally, it's still, that cultural bias people have towards men
Yeah.
and women in leadership positions. So, of course, a lot of business organizations have changed, and they have invited women to, their leadership, let's say, executive boards and so on and so on. But throughout the countryside, maybe that bias is still very strong. So, we don't know really. We probably need somebody to do a study there, and give us the numbers and so on. But maybe there is something there
Hmm.
as right. Okay, so, and thank you for the questions, Mario. Thank you very much for the congratulations, and I appreciate that. So, Mario, yes, yeah. Anyway, thank you very much.
so,
Right,
so
I
what does
don't.
Gabor have to say?
Okay, so Gabor, with Gabor, so Gabor writes, I joined late, and Timothy may have touched upon this, but I would be keen to hear how surprised or not surprised you are, Timothy, by Ishiba's comeback victory.
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised. I didn't expect it. I thought that there was so much animosity towards him as the traitor, as the person who is a turncoat. He stabs people in the back. He's not well liked among his peers within the Diet, but he's liked among the people in the populations, the rank and file LDP voters. And I thought that maybe Kobayashi would do a little bit better. But yeah, as the weeks began to unfold, we already knew it was going to either be Takaichi or uh, Ishiba or Koizumi. And when we knew that, that was probably pretty much decided almost as soon as the ballots, almost as soon as the candidate was closed out, as we had 9 candidates, I think it pretty quickly became a battle of not these 3 individuals, but a battle of the people above them, Aso, Kishida, and Suga. That's where the real dynamics occurred. And when it came out that it's either Koizumi or Ishiba or Takeichi, it really became Takeichi or Ishiba. And I kind of, I kind of liked Takeichi a little bit more. I thought she might have been a little bit more dynamic, but with Ishiba, it's probably a little bit more steady. And I think he'll make they'll both either one of them would have made a great prime minister. But leadership matters, and how things unfold. And I think the fact that he did have a defense ministry capabilities and experience probably went in his favor. On the other side, she was more of economic policy, but really rabidly against the Bank of Japan. So you could see that there was some conflict going on there. And so I think probably the party elders just thought, we don't want to have that much controversy between the prime minister's office and the Bank of Japan. Let them do their job, rely on them, don't try and control them too much, which is what she wanted to do. And, it was just by the skin of their teeth that Ishiba succeeded. So, yeah, a bit surprised. Yeah.
Okay.
How about you, Gabor? Were you surprised? I think not.
Yeah, Gabor, I would love to hear that. To me, personally, I think that I would be surprised. I would have been surprised if Takeichi-san won, honestly.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
But I love your writings on the topic, Gabor. Thank you very much for
Yes.
contributing.
Yes. Okay. From Gabor, thanks for the answer. I was thinking and expecting exactly the same as you said. Okay.
Okay.
All right, good. So, and thank you very much for this, Gabor. Also, we've got another question from Zizon. And Zizon, I hope that I pronounce your name, your handle name, correctly. So here we go. Okay, sorry if this question was answered before, but how would the Ishiba election affect the next general election in 2025? Can the Jiminto lose power then?
That's a great question. This is, who is this? Zaman?
Zizon.
Zizon.
Yeah.
I haven't recognized Zizon contributing before. A long-time listener and first-time questioner, perhaps.
I guess so, because
Okay.
Yes.
But thank you for contributing, and thank you for the great question. So there is one opportunity for there to be a joint election, the upper house and the lower house. So the upper house, it's set. They will have their election. 50% of the upper house will be elected in October of next year. And I think it's October. But the lower house, they have their election. Their 4-year term ends around the same time. And it is possible for them to have a joint election. It saves money if you're feeling kind of vigorous about your prospects and you are the person, the party that is controlling when the election will be held, the LDP, in other words, you might want to do a snap election. So it enhances your possibilities of gaining more seats. Currently, the thinking is that if there is an election right now, the LDP is going to lose 30, 40, 50, maybe even 60 votes. If it was an election that was held during the Kishida administration, definitely the LDP would have lost at least 60 votes. And that's why Mr. Kishida was so reluctant to push on an election. He was waiting for some gust of wind to fill his sails, some good news, something happening where he looked really great. I mean, he thought about it when he visited with President Joe Biden in Camp David. He thought about it, but it just quite wasn't the right kind of gust that he was looking for. And so he bypassed that and never did. So the opportunity now is, let's do it during the honeymoon. Let's provide, like Manabe-san said, a supplemental budget. Let people who are somewhat sitting on the fence become a little bit more appreciative of the administration, this new administration. I didn't like Ishiba, but now I like him, so I'll vote for the LDP. So even if they have an election and they don't lose but 30 votes, I think that will be a win. So that's the position of the LDP. They're not in a very strong position. If they push it out, the election, and they could do both. They could do the election for the lower house on the 27th of this month. I'm sorry, the 27th of next month. And have a double election later next year. That's also a possibility. But there's a lot of road building that needs to be done. And sometimes the population gets a little bit exhausted about that. We just had an election. These people that we voted for 6 months ago are now going up for an election again. Why are you doing that to us? But it is possible to happen. I kind of doubt that there'll be an election that restarts the 4-year clock for the members of the lower house and then have a joint election when it's time for the upper house to be elected. But the dynamics are really hard to read right now, but it's a great question. How the LDP is going to be able to strengthen its base and make people more confident and more trusting of the politicians. And that will require, a lot of building from, the current administration. And Ishiba has said, I'm a reformist. I'm going to reform the party. I'm going to make sure that the politics is clean and it's people who are generating funds for election and for political purposes are reporting on that. He was a little bit less definitive when asked about, is there punishment or retribution to be had for those people who were participating in the kickback scandal. He was not very clear about that. And I think his the ability for him to be the leader is very, very fragile. And I think for him to be a little bit reluctant to say something very strongly about that probably succeeded in, getting him that very thin margin. But
Right.
politics being as it is, it's very difficult.
But psychologically speaking, when we think about general population and the window of opportunity in times of change, actually the LDP has this window of opportunity right now
Yeah.
to hold a snap election, because we also know that nobody was afraid of the opposition until the opposition re-elected Mr. Noda, right?
Right.
And then at this point of time, we have an external factor that actually is a kind of, prompting the LDP to think about, well, maybe now it is better, it's better to have the election now rather to wait 1 year and probably have some more of our, let's say, dirty shirts, closet door.
No, that's a great observation, Maya. The fact that Mr. Noda is now the leader of the Constitutional Democratic Party. He was former prime minister, as you know, and he also grew up with Mr. Ishiba. They were in the same party at one point in time, so their policies are not distinctly different. Mr. Noda wants to distance himself from. So the fight between the Constitutional Democratic Party, where they had 4 candidates, Mr. Edano and Mr. Noda became the final contenders. Mr. Edano wanted to have this relationship or this distribution of election districts with the Japanese Communist Party, and that riled people on the other side of the Constitutional Democratic Party spectrum. And that spectrum on this side was guided by Mr. Noda. So now Mr. Noda is going to be distancing himself from that philosophy and forming more coalitions with, the Democratic Party and Isshin no Kai, so that they build a force there so that they can attack the preeminence of the LDP, and that's his guiding principle. But him fighting against Ishiba in this kind of context, it's a little bit more difficult for him than it would have been for him and Takaichi, because Takaichi comes from a different. She has many more attack points than Mr. Ishiba would have had in a debate. So the way to distinguish himself, the Constitutional Democratic Party from the LDP, will be more difficult with Ishiba than it would have been with Takaichi. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Psychologically, there's this force that's going on in the background, and probably sooner is better than later before or while the honeymoon period is still there.
Right. Okay. So just there are a couple of questions that will take us back to the LDP again. So one from Kai Lip Ang. Kai, thank you very much for the question. And it is, can you please comment on the future of Aso-san and the Aso faction in terms of working relations with the Ishiba administration?
That's a great question, Kai. So we are not quite sure, but I suspect that Mr. Aso will not run for another election. I think if there's a snap election or an election that is called by the prime minister this time around, I suspect that Mr. Aso will not run, and he'll turn it over to his son, and then his son will assume the seat that is vacated by his father and take over the leadership of the Aso faction. So in one sense, there is a bit of a hiccup here that Aso will be stepping down and his son will be stepping in and trying to consolidate the forces of the one remaining faction within LDP politics, the Aso faction. But it does provide a springboard for a greater, prominence in the next coming elections or in the next coming years, having a new Aso there. And also, if Mr. Aso does not run, it doesn't mean he's going away. I mean, look at Mr. Mori. Mori ceased being a member of parliament, almost 20 years ago, and still his power is still felt throughout Japanese politics. So I think Mr. Aso, and he's still vigorous. He still looks young. He's very bold. He's very active. So I don't think he's going away, but I think that, yes, there is, as the question kind of indicates, there is a tension between the Aso, or Mr. Aso, and Mr. Ishiba. They've never liked each other. They've not worked very closely together, although he was in the cabinet of Mr. Aso before Mr. Abe became prime minister. But I think they just don't like each other for a lot of reasons. And I think let's see what the cabinet looks like. If there are no Aso faction members in the cabinet, then that answer will be clearly answered. But there might be one or two just to kind of placate the waters, but you never know. So let's wait for that decision to be made, and then let's talk about it on Thursday.
Yeah, and then follow another question that actually touches upon the same topic from Manabe-san again. Was there a possibility that people within the party were not happy about Aso being at the forefront?
Say that again. Was it possible that people in the party were disappointed that
were not happy? So were there people in the LDP who weren't happy with Mr. Aso being at the forefront of the party?
I'm not sure I catch the.
Okay, were there any LDP members in the Diet who were not happy with Mr. Aso being among the leaders of the LDP?
Well, I guess the answer there is sure. I mean, he has a strong contingent of people who support him and want him to be on top, because that filters down to them. That means more of the cabinet positions or the committee positions or the LDP positions will be distributed among them. It's kind of in a proportional way of whoever becomes prime minister, how much weight Mr. Aso gave them to become prime minister. That proportional weight is distributed to these choice policy seats. And I think with Mr. Aso not doing as well, but you really can't say that either, because the distinction between Takaichi and Ishiba was not that great. So as prime minister, you've got to imagine, you've got to take care of the losers too. Because if you don't take care of the losers, then they're just going to be like Sanai Takaichi, and they're just going to be gadflies. They're going to be angry with you. They're going to be picking at everything that you do or say, and they're going to be in the wings waiting and writing books and being on television. And without having a cabinet portfolio, you have a lot of flexibility and a lot of leverage to, to be a critic, even if you're an LDP party member. But yeah, I think there are a lot of people that are disappointed, at least 50% that are disappointed that Mr. Aso was not in the pole position.
Oh, all right. Okay. Thank you for that. And continuing with the questions. Okay. So it's once again a question about Mr. Noda and from Zizon. Zizon is French, asking questions for the first time. Yes. So thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. And then a few days ago, I read in the Courrier International, a French newspaper about international news, that Noda-san, just a moment, that Noda-san would represent a hope to beat Jiminto. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's 5 times. He's tried 5 times and
Mm,
he's been defeated, 4 of those times. So when you go through something like this, I mean, look at Sanai Takaichi. It's her second run. She lost and she is mad. She just, she wants to scratch somebody's eyes out. And so when you put so much of your heart into something like this, you get your friends together, you make promises, you really pour yourself into it and you're defeated, it hurts. And
mm,
for Mr. Ishiba to have that pain and that suffering 4 times, you've got a long list of enemies and people who could have helped you if they just, you know, lifted a damn finger, right? So you know who these people are and you relied on them and they came through or they didn't come through. And, his likability among people in the LDP, the rank and file members who have the card that says they're an LDP members, voted predominantly for Ishiba. But among the Diet members, in the first round at least, they weren't as volatile. And so, that includes a lot of the people that are kind of lukewarm or just against him because he was in the LDP, he left the LDP, he came back from the LDP, so he's a backstabber. So
mm.
once you have that moniker, it's awful hard to kind of wash that away, as you know, in this culture. But in the end, he came through because of the support of Mr. Kishida and Mr. Suga. And so that fight between Suga and Kishida and Aso, on the other hand, all comes out into play. And I think it's related to the first question that you asked about Mr. Aso. What role will he play, and how about members of his faction? Will they play a role in the new cabinet?
Oh,
Yeah.
Timothy, sorry. I think that probably I didn't read the question clear enough, but it is about Mr. Noda, actually.
Okay.
Sorry for this. Okay, so does Mr. Noda pose a real or sorry, does Mr. Noda represent an opportunity to beat the LDP?
Okay.
Sorry for this. Please forgive me.
I think of the two candidates, Mr. Edano or Mr. Noda. Yes, definitely. Mr. Noda is no pushover. He is a very strong contender. He
Mhm.
will be a strong leader of the Constitutional Democratic Party. He was prime minister, and having been prime minister, you get the experience you get just having that role and that position and that kind of prestige. It really educates you in ways that only that experience gives you. So he'll be a very strong contender. The problem is that the Constitutional Democratic Party, it's got these two factions, and they went through an election. They selected this leader, so there's another arm of the party that needs to kind of coalesce under his leadership. How well they do that, how fractious is that grouping, we will tell in how well they're able to coalesce their forces with the other opposition groups like Isshin no Kai or the Democratic People's Party.
Mm,
Um, so it's not clear yet, but I think one of the things that Mr. Ishiba will want to do is have an election sooner rather than later, because if he has it later, it gives Mr. Noda time to coalesce his forces and to put that together. one of the things that will happen very quickly is once the extraordinary diet session starts, is there will be a session for debate. And the time of debates against or with the prime minister is dependent on how many members you have inside the diet. So the Communist Party will have, their 5 minutes, and then the Constitutional Democratic Party will have their 20 minutes. So it's a distribution based on what their weight is in the diet. And that questioning will come from Mr. Noda. And that will be very, very severe. It'll be very on point, and you will be able to see this tit-a-tat between these two political leaders, Mr. Noda, who once was prime minister, and Mr. Ishiba, who is being prime minister for the very first time. It should be very exciting to watch.
I agree with you, Timothy, but I also think that a lot of people remember, how badly Mr. Noda's cabinet did during, the time after the Tripoli disaster in 2011. Yep. Personally, I also remember how excited everybody was when, Mr. Noda formed the cabinet, and everybody had very high expectations. And suddenly, when they came to power, I think remembering, watching Mr. Noda saying this and that on TV immediately after, they won the election and he had to form a cabinet. And I also remember watching him and thinking, this guy is talking as if he was surprised that they won.
Yes.
Yeah. That was really such a revelation. And it turned out that they really were surprised that they won back then. They were not ready at all to govern the country. And of course, that disaster that happened soon after they came into power, of course, it just did them. They didn't know what to do and so on and so on. So I know that Mr. Noda is a tough contender, but also I think that a lot of people remember that his cabinet did quite poorly, in a very, very critical period for Japan. So I don't know what your thoughts on this are, but I cannot help thinking this, and remembering this every time somebody says, Mr. Noda is a tough contender. And he is. Of course, I recognize that.
So when they announced that there was going to be an election for the leader of the party with Mr. Izumi, Mr. Izumi would obviously run to succeed himself for a third term. The fact that Mr. Edano threw his hat into the ring was not unexpected. It was somewhat surprising. But then Noda showed up and threw his hat into the ring too. And I had the same sentiment that you did. Oh my gosh, it's the same pattern of speech. It's the same face. It's the same kind of diction that he uses. And it just psychologically, it triggers in me this remembrance of this reflection of what happened way back then. And I had the same thoughts as well. And I think I'm not a Japanese voter, so probably the Japanese are feeling that even more in a magnitude than either you and I are as observers.
Yeah, indeed. But okay, we have a comment about this from Joseph Murphy on LinkedIn, and Joseph writes, political tip for all candidates. However unlikely, be prepared to win. Yes, that's. I think it's a very good tip, and it is still easier said than done.
Yeah.
But we'll see. And of course, we cannot discount that. However disastrous that experience, of Noda cabinet was in 2011 and 12, I think it is still an experience, and maybe they can learn from it. So, who knows what happens. Well, thank you very much, really, Timothy. And to everybody who tuned in, it seems that we have gone through all the questions and comments. Timothy, there is a fashion appreciation of, from Yuka. She says, I love Timothy's shirt.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Yuka, for tuning in as well and telling us that, what you appreciate, and for your great questions to everybody as well, the comments. Also, thank you for helping us with the latest bits of information, which sometimes we miss. It's really important to have them from you, and it helps a lot. So from Diana Green, thank you. Ongoing excellent reporting. Congratulations on the 119th episode. Diana, thank you very much for tuning.
Thank you, Diana.
Yes, we appreciate this too. We'll be here once again next Sunday at 8:20.
Hopefully from the good ship, something or other.
Something or rather,
Yes,
yes. Hopefully from, well, somewhere around Tokyo, not
yes.
not exactly from the heart of Tokyo. All right. So thanks a lot again, Timothy, for all
Thank
your
you.
dedication. I appreciate it, and I'm sure that everybody who watches us does the same. And to if you're watching still, if you're still with us on LinkedIn or YouTube, please give us a like or leave a comment or just give us thumbs up because it tells us that you are there and this you're showing your support to us. Also, before we say goodbye, I would like to once again say thank you to our sponsors, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku or Kanchu at kanachu.com, James Howell there, and Houze Inc. with Hana Urushizawa Howell. You will find their contact details in the description of the video on YouTube, and you can reach out to them on LinkedIn so that you can work with them either in English or in Japanese if you have in mind any project in real estate, rebuilding, home design, or reconstruction. Do not hesitate to reach out. Well, that's all for today. We hope that you have a great Sunday. It's kind of cloudy here, but it's still a nice day. And wherever you are in France or South Africa or in other parts of the world, enjoy the day, enjoy the night. That's
Thanks for
all.
tuning in. See you on Thursday.
See you on Thursday. Yes.
Click, click, click.